Hi guys, welcome back to this new video in this little series about technical drawings. In this one, we're going to be making a tool to visualize angles. As in the first video, we're going to have a controller to animate the whole thing, another controller to change the angle. We're going to be able to change the text size, the length of the lines, the offset of the value, the center offset. We're going to be able to change the lines thickness and the arrow size. So let's dive in. We're going to make a new null object. I'm going to call this one angle. And I'm going to create two more splines. The first one is going to be called start angle. I'm going to control drag it and call this one end angle. We're going to select both of them. I'm going to set the display mode to line. The angle null, I'm going to modify the display to be a point. We want the orientation to be on XY. I'm going to set its color to green. So for the angle, I select the null object. I'm going to go to user data and manage user data. I'm going to add a new one. This one will be angle. I want a float slider. I want the units to be degrees. I want this to go from 0 to 360. Then we can control drag it again. I call this length. We want a float slider as well. We want reels. This one goes from 0 to 1000 with 100 as a default value. We're going to set the default angle to 45. I hit OK. So we have now two user datas. I'm going to add a new xpresso tag and import the angle null. I set the node color to green. And I'm going to import the user datas, the angle and the length. I'm going to right click and optimize. So we got the start angle and the end angle. I'm going to import both in the xpresso. And I'm importing the length value for those. I'm connecting directly the length. On the end angle, I want to change the P angle. I bring it in my xpresso. I exchange both outputs and I'm going to connect the angle to the P angle. So this is for starters. So now we can change the angle and the length of the lines. I'm going to select both mouse splines. I'm going to select a sweep using Alt. This makes them parents of the mouse splines. Then using Shift, we're going to add end sides. This will give us some thickness to the lines. We're going to set this to 8 sides to smooth the lines. We could add more, but I guess this could be enough. I'm going to double click in the textures to add a new material. I'm going to uncheck everything except the luminance. I set this to white and I'm going to add it to the angle null. I'm going to add a new user data. I'm going to control drag the length. And I call this one thickness. I'm going to set this value to 100. I'm going to use 1 as a default value. I'm going to import the thickness in the xpresso. In the mouse splines, I'm going to import the width value. And we're going to connect the thickness to the width. So we're going to be able to change the thickness from here. I'm going to change the value to 0.5. We can add these sweeps in a connect object. Maybe here we want to cut the start of the lines, which could be convenient on certain drawings. So I'm going to add in a cylinder. I'm going to change the orientation to X+. I'm going to add a boolean. We're going to subtract the cylinder from the lines. So I'm going to set the cylinder at the end. I'm going to reduce the cylinder height. I'm going to add a new user data that I call center offset. I'm going to keep 1000 and 20 for the default value. We import this new one in the xpresso. I import the cylinder and we're going to import the radius. I connect the center to the radius, and this will allow us to offset the starting points of the lines. So usually for the angles, here you want to have an arc. So I simply add an arc with Alt-G. I'm going to set this in a null. I call this one arrow. We want this to be on the Y. We're going to add a new user data. And I simply call this one offset. So in the xpresso, I'm going to import that. I get my arc. I get its radius. And I'm going to connect this to the offset. So now we can just offset the arc. For the end angle, we want this to adjust to the second line. So I import the end angle, and we just want this to take the same value as the overall angle. So here we should have the little arc following the angle. I select the arc, and using Alt, I'm going to add in a new sweep. And then with Shift, I'm going to add a mouse spline. I change the display mode to line. I'm going to set the length to 10 centimeters. And then we want to just change the H angle, and we're going to set this one to 90. Now if you have a closer look, I don't want no caps. If I select the arc and deactivate the sweep, we can see that the arc is really at the border of the sweep. So we're going to correct that, and in the mouse spline, in the Object tab, we're going to set the offset to be minus 50%. So this way the sweep will be centered on the arc. Maybe we want to reduce the length of the mouse spline. So as for the measurement lines, we want to add some arrows at the ends. So we're going to add a disk. I'm going to hit Alt-G. This will be arrow start and start arrow. I'm going to reduce the outer radius. And for the arrow start, we're going to add an align to spline tag. The spline path will be the arc. We have the start on this side. And for the disk, we want to align this to X. We want only 3 rotation segments. And for the disk segments, we want to set this to 1. Then with the disk selected, we're going to go to the MoGraph effectors. And using Shift, we're going to add a plane. We want the deformation to happen on the objects. We uncheck the position, and we want to change the scale. I'm going to set the Z value to minus 0.6. I'm going to control drag this one and call this arrow end. And this will be end arrow. I'm hiding the planes. And for the align to spline for this one, I'm going to set the position to be 100%. So we just want this to be tangent. And this one as well. And using Shift to have 10 degrees increments, we're going to align the arrows. Once more, I'm going to add a new user data. So I copy this one. And I call this arrow size. I'm going to re-import the angle. I'm going to make it green. Here we want the arrow size. I import the disks. We're going to import the outer radius. Same for the end arrow. And we want to import the mouse spline. And for the mouse spline, we want to change the length. We're going to connect both disks directly. We can now change the arrow size here. This looks a little big for me, so I'm going to change the user data. So for the arrow size, we want this to go from 0 to 100. So it's going to be more precise when we adjust the size. So for those values, we can set the step to be 0.001. Same for the thickness offset, center offset, and arrow size. So this gives us a little more room to adjust more precisely. I'm going to set the arrow size to 4. And for the mouse spline, we're going to add in a math node. I connect this. I'm gonna set this to multiply. And I'm gonna multiply this one by 0.2. So if we test this out, we're gonna be able to change the size. The arc will be proportional to the arrows. I'm gonna leave this to 4 for now. So for the thickness, we could add in a new math node. And I'm gonna connect this here and divide this one by 2. And I'm gonna connect this here as well. So if I set the thickness to 1, for example, the size of the sweep will be 1 as expected. To correct the position of the arrows, we're gonna have to do some trigonometry. We would like the arc to be a little bit shorter on this side and this side as well. We want to move this back a little bit, and we want to know the angle on the base on this side. So the angle we are looking for is this one. So tangent of this angle is equal to BC divided by AC. BC will be the diameter of this arrow plus the radius of the line. And AC will simply be the radius of the arc. So I'm gonna control drag this angle. I delete the port. So I'm gonna need the arrow size, which is the diameter of the arrow. We're gonna need the thickness, which is the diameter of the line. And finally, we need the offset, which is the value of this line. We're gonna need a new math node, and we're gonna add those one together. So we wanna divide BC, the result of this node. We're gonna add a new math node. I'm gonna connect it. I set the node to divide, and we wanna divide this by the offset, which is the AC segment. We're gonna need a node called Trigonometric. And if we connect this, we're gonna be able to change the function. And the one we need is tangent. So this will give us a value that we can add in the arc angle and that we can subtract on the other side. So maybe we can add this right here. So we don't need another one. I'm gonna move this down. I'm gonna select those nodes and move them up. I'm gonna add in the start angle in the arc and connect the result in here. Here we have a little offset, and this is because we use the diameter and we need to use the radius. So we're just gonna copy the math node, and we're gonna just divide the thickness by 2. So this is for the start angle. And for the end angle, we just want to subtract this from the existing value. So we're going to copy a new math node. We set this one to subtract. I'm going to set the angle as the first input. And we're going to subtract the result of the trigonometric. And this will be our new end angle. So the arrows are now where we want them. We have too much subdivision on the mouse spline. For the mouse spline, we're going to set the steps to 2. And on the other way, we don't have enough subdivisions. So we're going to select the arc and we're going to set the angle to 2 degrees. We could set this to 1 degree. We now want the value in the middle. So we go to MoGraph, we're going to add a MoText. We set the depth to 0. I'm gonna hit Alt-G once more. I call this new null measure. And we wanna align this to the arc. I'm gonna select the null. In the tags, I want to align to spline. And for the spline path, I use the arc. I reduce the text size. I wanna align this to the middle. We want the align to spline to be tangent. I want the position to be 50%. And using Shift, I'm gonna rotate the text. I control drag the arrow size, and this will be the text size. So I'm gonna use 5 as a default value. I import the angle. I import the text. I'm gonna add in the height of the text. And in the angle null, I'm gonna get the text size. I connect this. I get the grain value for the node. So this seems to work. Now we want to animate this. I add a new user data. I call this one anim. So we want percentages, and I want this to be a float slider. So I set this on top. I add a new data, which will be a separator. I move it up. I'm gonna hit OK. So this will be the animation slider. So I import the angle, I import the animation. I set this to grain. And we're gonna need a range mapper. So this will go in the input. As we've seen in the last tutorial, this will be our new timeline if you want. So we're going to be using the range mapper to define the start and end of the animation. And for the output, we're going to use the fact that it's going from 0 to 1 to multiply the value that we want. When it's multiplied by 0, it's going to give us 0. And when we multiply by 1, we're going to have the value that we want. So we're going to use these to animate the mouse spline length. We defined them here. So I want to animate from 0 to 0.5. So this means that when the slider goes from 0 to 50%, we're going to have the mouse splines growing. Once more, we're going to use a math node to multiply. So I set this one to multiply, and we're going to multiply the range mapper output by the length. So when the animation slider goes from 0 to 50%, we're going to multiply first by 0, and progressively we're going to multiply by 1. So if I connect this to the length on the start and end, when I move my slider from 0 to 50, the lines are growing. So just to make things easier, I'm gonna go to frame 0, set a keyframe at 0%, and at frame 25, I'm gonna add a new keyframe at 100%. Here you can see that if we go further than 50%, the lines are still growing. We had the same thing last time. We're gonna select the range mapper, and in the node tab, we're gonna clamp lower and clamp upper. I'm gonna set this one to blue. I'm gonna right click the animation. I'm gonna go to show F curve, and we're gonna set this one to linear because we don't want any smoothing on the keyframes. We're gonna manage the animation in the range mapper. So in the parameters spline, we're gonna control click and add some points. And this is the spline that controls the animation. I want to ease out on the last keyframe. So this is the kind of spline I want. So we're gonna have a quick start and an ease out. So this is maybe too much. We want this to happen on the angle too. So I'm gonna copy the multiply. And this time we're gonna multiply the range mapper and the angle. I connect this to the angle. We're gonna need a new range mapper so we can offset the animation. Gonna connect the range mapper, and we want this to be happening from 0.5 to 1. So between 50% and 100% of the animation. We want this to be happening on the arc as well. So I'm gonna copy the multiply once more. So we want this to do the same as for the unfolding of the line. We're gonna multiply this by the end angle. So okay, we have the animation of the unfolding. We can increase the angle if we want. So maybe we want the ease out to be stronger on this one, like this. So maybe we want to change the timing a little bit. Maybe we want the lines to be appearing quicker from 0 to 0.4. And for the angle, maybe from 0.4 to 1. I'm just gonna offset the second keyframe. I'm gonna leave it on 30. I'm gonna hit Ctrl D. I'm gonna set the frame rate to 25. I noticed a little error, and when the angle is unfolding, the arrow has a little offset here. And this is because the multiply is not in the right spot. We want this to be happening before we subtract the offset value of the arrow. We're gonna just connect the angle right into the multiply. I'm gonna move the multiply and I'm gonna just connect this into the subtract. And this will be our new end angle. Next, we wanna animate the text. So we're gonna start from this range mapper, which is opening the angle. We're gonna import the measure. We're gonna import the text field. We're gonna be multiplying the range mapper by the angle. I'm gonna import the angle here. We add a new math node. I'm gonna connect the range mapper and the angle, and I'm gonna connect the output right into the text. And of course, we want this to be multiplied. The value here is a little weird. This is because it's giving us radians. So we're gonna look for a degree node. We wanna convert the radians to degrees. I connect this here, and now the value is in degrees. So by default, we're gonna have 3 decimals. We could change this by going to the system presets. We're gonna search for set decimals. I connect this to the value. So if we want 2 decimals, we could use this node to do this. Here the following is at 2. We could have only 1 following decimal. We could have 10 if we want. I like to have no decimals. So this will round off the value. We could do the same using a float function. And using a floor function, this will simply remove all decimals. I guess those two do exactly the same. So using the set decimals with 0 following does exactly the same that the math flow. But just so you know, you could use the set decimals to have exactly the decimal numbers that you want. So I prefer no decimals, so I'm gonna let this like that. So we're gonna do something similar to last time. We're gonna have the text sitting in the line, and we want to cut the line so we see the text. So I'm gonna import the text. We're gonna look for a Python node. I'm gonna delete the input and outputs, and we're gonna make new ones. Here we want the object output, and we're gonna connect this to a link. In the output, we want a vector, and we're gonna be able to edit the Python node here. Here it's gonna be input1.getRad, and this getRad is gonna output the bounding box of the text. There is already a bounding box node in the xpresso, but it only works on polygonal objects. As the text is a generator, we're gonna have to use this little workaround. I'm gonna add a cube. I'm gonna add the cube in the measure. I'm gonna hit Shift-C, reset PSR. So it's aligned to the null object. I'm gonna import the cube. I'm gonna import the size X and size Y. I'm gonna optimize this. We want a vector to reals. So this allows to separate the 3 values of the vector. And now we have X, Y, Z. We're gonna connect X and Y. And on the Z value, I'm gonna set this to 5. So if I reduce here, we're gonna see that the cube is not oriented the right way. The getRad gives us a radius. It's going from the center of the object to the border. So we're only gonna have half of the size. So I'm just gonna multiply this by 2. And I'm gonna rotate the cube. And we just wanna have some room for the text here. So I'm gonna add a new math node. On X, I select it and I'm gonna multiply by 1.5. So we're gonna have some room for the text. We can change this value depending on what we need. Now we wanna subtract this cube from the sweep. So in the arrow, we're gonna select the sweep. Using Alt, we're gonna add a Boolean. If I add the cube in there, it's gonna subtract this from the sweep. But if the cube is in there, it's not gonna follow. So we're gonna select the cube and we're gonna add a constraint tag. I'm gonna select PSR, and for the target, we're gonna use this null. The issue is the cube is rotated again. So in the offset, we could set the H value to 90. We just need to reposition the text. So we get the text over here. Gonna import this at the end. We're gonna need the Y value of the text. We're gonna add a new math node. We need the Y size of the text we calculated in the Python. We're gonna connect this to the position. So this is not going in the right direction, and this is because we want to multiply this by minus 0.5. And now we got the text centered on the line. So here we get a slight offset. We're gonna add the arrow at the end. So this way the PSR constraint is happening at the very end. So we get rid of the offset. I'm gonna move the last keyframe to make this longer. We want the arrow to appear around there. So when the animation is around 40%. So back to the xpresso, we're gonna add a new null. I set it in there. I call this hide. I'm gonna set the measure and the arrow as a child. I'm gonna use this to hide the arrows. I'm gonna control drag the angle once more. I delete the angle. We're gonna need a compare node. And we're gonna check the animation value. When we are greater than 0.4, we want this one to be visible. So we're gonna import the visibility parameters. So if I now connect this to the compare, I'm just gonna set this to be inferior, and it should hide the arrow when the animation is below 0.4. So let's say we have the angle pointing down. We want to reverse the text. To do that, we're gonna add a new data. We want this to be a Boolean. I call this one invert. This invert will just rotate the text. So on the angle here, I'm just gonna import the invert. And this is gonna activate a condition. Like that, so we just have to connect the invert to the switch. Here we're gonna have the text. So we want to change the P angle. We connect this to the rotation. For now the invert is unchecked, so we want this to stay at 0. And for this one we want 180 degrees. So if I now check the invert, it's gonna rotate the text. Here it's the same issue as before. We need to convert the radians to degrees. I'm gonna get the degree node. I connect this one in between. And here we want to convert the degrees to radians. And we also want to change the position. We already have the Y position here. This will be the value when the switch is off. So here we are multiplying by minus 0.5. And when the switch is on, we want this to be multiplied by 0.5. I'm gonna copy the multiply. I'm gonna set this one to 0.5. I'm gonna connect the Y. Here we're gonna need the condition again. I'm gonna use the switch. And in the first input, we're gonna use the default value. And in the second input, we're gonna need the corrected value. So here we have 0.5, and in this one, it's gonna be minus 0.5. Here we connect this to the Y position of the text. So the text is back where it should be. So if I uncheck this, it's gonna be back to normal, and it's in the right position. The file has been done in R19. If you're using a newer version of Cinema, you may have this little circle popping up. This is the cylinder that we have in the Boolean here. So to address that, it's quite simple. You just have to hide it in here, and this way you won't see it anymore. So here we have the animation of the angle. Here we should be able to change the angle value and the animation should still be working. We can change the length, the offset. Everything seems to be working as expected. So that's it for the angles. And in the next video, we're gonna make a tool for the diameters. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one. Bye.